Welcome into this Big Ten Today on a Wednesday. We are presented by Gatorade. I'm Dave Revson. Great to have you with us. A ton to get to in the next hour, including a huge hoops result for the Big Ten last night. We will have reaction to that, but it's Wednesday. We had college football playoff rankings last night. That is where we have to start. Jerry DiNardo is here. And Jerry, the one thing I can say is at least the college football rankings reveal was abbreviated last night. So yeah, that was a blessing. We got some time back there.
Yeah, no doubt. You know, it's really exciting to have them get through it very quickly.
Just cut to the chase, tell us what we need to know, and that was what they did. And so here is what we found out. That is our big story. It is the latest college football playoff ranking. 6 Big Ten teams in the top 25 again this week. Iowa dropped out. They were replaced by Illinois. Ohio State and Indiana remain 1 and 2. Oregon is also in what would be the current bracket at 7. We'll get to that in a moment. USC and Michigan remain in the conversation. Were they to win out? Trojans have a huge game at Oregon this week. Michigan will visit Maryland, and then, as you're probably aware, if you're watching the Big Ten Network, they finished their season against Ohio State. As for what it means bracket-wise, the Bucks and the Hoosiers would get a bye. Ohio State would await the winner of Notre Dame and Oklahoma. The Hoosiers would get the winner of the Ducks and Alabama. Oregon would host that hypothetical opening round game. Miami is the highest ranked ACC game, so they're in the bracket, though they have a very difficult path to actually getting the automatic spot for that conference. And Tulane is now the non-power conference team. Jerry, I know you tend to focus more from a committee point of view on do they rank the Big Ten correctly, as that's where your primary focus is. So let's take it. You got two groups of 3. You've got the 3 that are in the bracket right now, Ohio State, then Indiana, then a fairly significant gap to Oregon. Do you feel like those 3 are in the correct order from your point of view?
Yeah, I do. You know, the second 3, I know you're going to mention them now. You know, that's obviously a little bit closer, but I don't have any problem with the way that they've ranked all of the Big Ten schools at all.
So what, in your mind, separates Ohio State from Indiana?
Well, not much. You know, I mean, I think we're going to find out here pretty soon what separates
We're
them.
fixing to, as they like to say, yeah.
Yeah, you know, they're both explosive on offense. You know, I worry maybe a little bit more about Ohio State's schedule than I do Indiana's schedule. You know, that you know, maybe it's been not as competitive the last 4 games for the Ohio State team, but you know, I don't know how you separated. I mean, we're gonna find out in Indianapolis, I would guess.
Yeah, and again, like I understand, I think you could compare the Penn State game, for instance. Obviously, Ohio State won it more handily than Indiana did. Again, to your point, we have a great chance of finding out. They're on a collision course with one another. It would be one of the most anticipated Big Ten championship games of all time, were those 2 to square off in Indy. And then those 3, I mean, you put Oregon in there, they're all among the top 5 in the nation in point differential. So I think there's a pretty significant separation right now between those 3 and the next group of 3. Obviously, where the intrigue is you've got one team from the top group of 3 getting set to meet one from the bottom group of 3 in Oregon going up against USC this week. But what do you think of the order, USC, Michigan, and then Illinois?
Well, tougher to just buy into it, right? I mean, they're a little bit closer. You know, committee-wise, I find it, and again, I don't like to talk about teams that I haven't studied on video. I haven't seen them on TV either. But there seems to be a bias to me, and I mentioned this last week when we had the same conversation, that a 2-loss SEC team gets a pass over a 2-loss Big Ten team. And I think it's the perception of every committee that we've had since the beginning that the SEC is a stronger conference. So if you're going to have a 2-loss team in a playoff situation, of course it has to come from the SEC because that's the best conference in the country. So I do think there's a bias there. But, you know, the second 3 in the Big Ten, you know, they're all pretty close. You know, I don't have any disagreement really with the way they're ranked. They're, as long as they stay together like they are, because I think they're all 3 of them are pretty close in their abilities.
And to your point, every 2-loss SEC team is ahead of USC, which is the highest ranked of those two-loss Big Ten teams. We've obviously seen those teams go head-to-head. We saw SC beat Michigan. We saw Illinois beat SC, though they do have one more loss. So, again, look, I think the understanding is this year you're not going to get in with 3 losses. I know there's this group that's somehow trying to force Texas into that conversation. It just feels like that's not going to happen. You never know until it's over. But it feels like 2 losses is the cutoff here. And, again, we'll have a really good sense as to where things stand with the Big Ten after this huge game coming up this weekend. Jerry, I do want to ask you about Indiana. They're not playing this week, and it just feels like a good time to take a breath and talk about the Hoosiers. You know, the other thing that's going on simultaneous with this college football playoff discussion, obviously, is, I would say, the most frenzied and talked about series of Power 5 coaching searches that I can remember in quite a while. We're going to have a ton of openings. We already saw James Franklin getting the Virginia Tech job this week. There's going to be a bunch more. Some are already open. A bunch more are going to come open. And everyone is trying to find the next Curt Cignetti, who's just done such a masterful job here in these 2 years at Indiana. I'm curious, from your point of view, what is the lesson in Curt Cignetti? Like, how has he done this at IU?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. But I don't think it's as simple as find someone that has a similar record as Curt Cignetti. In other words, some successful head coach on a lower level, hire them, and you're going to get the same result. I think this was a perfect storm in that when they hired Curt Cignetti, they didn't realize how good a coach he was. This is about people. Scott Dolson, the athletic director, took a risk, I think, on Curt Cignetti, because I can't think of another program that did the same thing. So for people to think that the answer now is to do what Scott did, just pick any successful head coach at James Madison or a school similar to that, and the result would be the same. No, I think it's these 2 extraordinary people. Scott Dolson, an extraordinary athletic director, and Curt Cignetti, regardless of where he came from, if he never was a head coach and he got this opportunity, I think the result would be the same. I don't think it's because he coached at a lower level and won a lot of games. I think he's had that inside of him the whole time. If he would have gotten a job from when he was on the staff at Alabama, I think the same thing would have resulted. And so, because it's about people at the end of the day. It's not about this process. It's not about hire a coach from a lower level that's had success. If you're going to do that, you know, that's 50-50. Curt Cignetti is not 50-50. He'd have been a great coach no matter what his path was. I really believe that.
And I flash back, you know, you give a lot of credit to Scott Dolson. Obviously, he deserves a massive amount of credit for identifying Curt Cignetti, a guy who other programs had obviously had the opportunity to hire through the years. I remember standing with him 2 years ago, Jerry. So when we were on our practice tour before Curt Cignetti's first year, and he said to me, I said, how'd you come up with this guy? And he basically said, hey, I really systematically went through it. We studied historically. Who is it that had been able to turn around programs? What were some of the characteristics? One of the things he mentioned was developing quarterbacks, but there was a whole checklist that he went through and said, here are the characteristics of people who have succeeded at programs that are similarly positioned to ours. And then he kind of ran it through, like who would meet that criteria. And Curt Cignetti was the guy who showed up. And obviously it's a pretty good set of criteria because it's worked out. But to your point, it's not just about those criteria. It's about the particular genius of Curt Cignetti as well. And it's been amazing to watch. And now all that stands between them and their first ever spot in the Big Ten championship game is that game against Purdue next week.
And to continue the theme of it's about people, not about necessarily the process. I mean, his dad was a great mentor to him. Nick Saban was a great mentor to him. So you have all these extraordinary people that have done extraordinary things lined up. That's not always going to be lined up if you just say, let's find a coach at a lower level that's had success. It's more about the people.
Yeah, and it certainly is where he's the right person at the right time. There's no question about that. So the Hoosiers are off this week. But as we get into the rest of this week's games here on the big board, again, a lot of focus on Michigan. Can they beat Maryland and head into the showdown with Ohio State at 9-2? That Michigan game's on our air, as is Illinois. They will be in Madison. That's our primetime game. Ohio State hosts Rutgers. But the biggest game is in Eugene, USC and Oregon. Huge game for both teams' playoff aspirations. And the Trojans kept their aspirations alive by rallying to take down Iowa last week. Our Gatorade Big Stat looking at their impressive second half against the Hawks, a half they won 16-0, thanks in large part to the exploits of Mekhi Lemon. 111 of his 153 receiving yards came in those final 30 minutes. An SC team that lost 5 one-score games last year. They pick up a massive close victory here. And so now they take on the Ducks. Jerry, how do you break this one down?
You know, I think one thing that we've learned in the last couple of years that at this moment, you take by way of example the Oregon-USC game, 2 of the new schools that obviously joined the Big Ten a couple of years ago, that the line of scrimmage was a question, I think, for all of us. I know it was a question for me. Could they compete at the line of scrimmage? And it's interesting. They both have played Iowa, and they both have obviously competed with Iowa. But even before that, now I do think Oregon's a little bit ahead of SC. But you know, you can make the same comment about Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State. You know, who's a little bit ahead, who's got the better line of scrimmage, and you're splitting hairs. But I think the debate is over that the West Coast teams, well, specifically Oregon and USC, aren't as strong at the line of scrimmage. I think they've proven that they are. I would give Oregon a little bit of the edge if I combine both offensive and defensive lines. But they're certainly playoff ready and Big Ten ready at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Oregon on the defensive line has held up more consistently against the run than USC has this year. But you could just tell from Lincoln Riley's reaction how important it was to him, not just to win the game. Obviously, it's important to win the game, but the manner in which they won it. And he talked about that some in the postgame, to exactly your point. I mean, I think if you think about physical Big Ten teams, Iowa is pretty early in that conversation. And to go toe-to-toe with the Hawkeyes and dominate them in the second half the way SC did speaks to how good USC is in that physical nature of the game. So if you think it's largely a line of scrimmage draw, maybe slight advantage to Oregon, what do you think ultimately separates these two?
I think 2 things. I think that the run game of our Oregon is more explosive, and I do think that a weakness of the SC team is the second-level defense. I'm concerned about the linebackers, and I could see that Oregon is they like to run gap scheme, which you're watching right here. And when you run a gap scheme and you don't have the linebackers on the same page with the same shoulder free, and you're not real physical linebacker, you open yourself up to explosive run plays. So I think that's the issue. Then we have to talk about the 2 quarterbacks. I mean, these 2 quarterbacks are really, really good. Now, Jaden Maiava to me is not as consistent, but I mean, these are 2 of the best quarterbacks playing in the game, and Jaden can beat you running or passing. He's proven that in 2 games. It was the Nebraska game and the Northwestern game where he won one with his legs and one with his arms. So linebackers on the SEC defense, I'm concerned about as far as big plays, and the 2 quarterbacks. Which of these 2 quarterbacks play the best game?
And Oregon just doesn't give up big plays. They've given up 17 plays of 20 yards or longer, which is the fewest in the nation. We've seen how explosive USC can be. Can they be that explosive against the Ducks? I think it's one of the huge question marks that surrounds this game. Back on Big Ten today, Michigan has run the ball extremely well this year, 12th in the nation in yards per game on the ground. They've been over 200 yards in 3 straight games. The issue is they are banged up. Justice Haynes out indefinitely after foot surgery. Jordan Marshall's been great, but he left the Northwestern game with a shoulder injury. One-time walk-on Bryson Cusdall picked up the slack admirably against the Wildcats. Here's Sharon Moore on where things stand with his backs.
Jordan Marshall, same kind of thing I told you after the game. X-rays were negative. Feel good about where he's at, but we'll see. We'll take it day by day and see where he's at. But if Bryson has to be the guy, I feel very comfortable with him. He's explosive. He's probably faster than Jordan, probably not as strong, but maybe, I don't, he's a strong kid for how built he is. He's about 5'11", 6 foot, 210, 215. He's got bursts, probably right below Justice in the speed, but maybe right at that and can get there. But a physical runner, he's gotten more physical. Great kid that has just worked his tail off to get where he needs to be, and excited to see what he does.
So pretty cool story there. They take on Maryland this week. Again, that is the preamble to this huge game against Ohio State. But you got to figure out a way to get through it. The Terps, of course, playing after the news that Mike Locksley will be back next year. So perhaps play some inspired football at home, Jerry. This is a matchup of the only two true freshmen starting quarterbacks in the Big Ten. How do you match those two guys up against one another?
Well, they're kind of in different universes a little bit, because Sharon obviously wants to be, I think, 60-40 run to pass. And so that impacts how much Bryce is part of the equation. Now, neither one, I consider both these guys not dual threat quarterbacks, because both teams do not run a lot of option. Michigan isn't going to be an option team with Bryce, but they both can really escape the pocket under pressure. And so Bryce brings that to the table as far as when he's being pressured, he can scramble out. I think that what they're doing with Bryce is they're bringing him along slowly. Chip Lindsey's done a really good job with him with the pass game. But right now, Bryce needs a strong running game and a defense that'll put him in really good position. I think Malik is further along right now. Malik really has been asked to do more by Pep Hamilton, the offensive coordinator, and Mike Locksley in the Maryland offense. I think Maryland wants to be 50-50. So they're both really talented. Obviously, they're both young quarterbacks, but they're in different schemes. And the scheme that Malik is in, they're going to ask him to do more, even at this young age. They both can escape on pressure, and they're both perfect fits for what their coaches want them to do.
And some of that just a function of the fact that Maryland hasn't been able to run the ball nearly as well as Michigan has. Kind of to your point, Malik Washington throwing nearly 39 passes per game. That is the most in the Big Ten. And Maryland has had to be very reliant on that passing attack so far this year with the deficiencies in the run game. So that's the story in College Park. Again, that's a game you can see here on the Big Ten Network, and that's the game that Michigan will try to win to go into the Ohio State game with a chance to win and get themselves potentially into the Big Ten championship game in the college football playoff. How about the Ohio State Buckeyes? They get Rutgers this week. We know the struggles that they have had in recent years with Michigan. You could think about the possibility of that maybe affecting this game against the Scarlet Knights, but Ryan Day insisting his team will be focused and ready to go.
We don't take anything for granted. We don't take we don't make any assumptions, man. Like every week, every Saturday, an opportunity to get to Indianapolis is on the line. That's the way it is here right now. I mean, we want to get to Indy, and we haven't got to Indy here. There's nobody on this team that's been to Indy right now, and they know it. And so, like that's the edge. Wake up in the morning every day looking to reach our goals. So whoever we play, we play. This is going to be a great challenge this week. We know that, and we just watch across college football every week, and you just see, different teams, challenging each other, and we got to do our part. So we can't worry about what we can't control. And you've heard me say that before. I know it sounds boring, but it's the truth. We got to worry about what we can control.
And one of the things you can't control, Jerry, is kind of what happens to the other teams on your schedule. I mean, I think the schedule looked more challenging, and then Wisconsin didn't have the year that people had hoped they'd have, and probably most importantly, Penn State didn't have the year that people thought that they would have. And so the Ohio State schedule is less challenging in practice than I think it was on paper. But there is certainly the possibility that we could end up in a scenario again this week. In fact, it's probably the expectation that Ohio State finds itself with a huge lead over Rutgers, with that game against Michigan looming, the game they've lost 4 years in a row. How do you handle that in game if you're Ryan Day? Like if things start to go your way and you see this as a blowout, is there a way that you manage that as a coach?
Yeah, and this has been a tough schedule to manage. I mean, obviously, we thought Penn State was going to be a much bigger game, but the last four teams they've played only have won 12 games. So to your question, what Ryan Day just said is what he is saying to his team, and he's right. They haven't been to Indy, but there may come a time during this game, if Ohio State has a lead that is secure, that we already know Ryan Day's running less plays. If they have a lead that secures the game, there'll be some other players coming in other than their starters. But I would say that if Ohio State beats Rutgers, the players won't even wait to get to the locker room to talk about the Michigan game. It'll be the conversation from shaking Rutgers players' hands if they win. On the way to the locker room, all they're going to be talking about is this Michigan game. This Michigan game will be the most intense Ohio State-Michigan on the Ohio State side I think that we've had in recent years. This is what they've wanted. This is one of the things that they've wanted to do, and they haven't done it, obviously, for a few years.
Yeah,
this will occupy their minds.
Right.
If I was head of the operation and someone cut class, I might even forgive them for cutting class this week.
You might forgive them for cutting class because they'd be focused on the Michigan game. I'm not sure I understand the parallel.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, after the game, I'm saying if they go into the game undefeated, I mean, this is going to be a very intense week for the Ohio State players. I'm saying more intense than in recent years.
Yeah, I thought the same thing last year. I mean, I didn't think there was any way that Michigan would beat them last year, and I thought Ohio State was so primed to prove that they were the better program and give Michigan a ton of credit as they won last year, 4th year in a row. It is amazing to think what Ryan Day said, that 4 years Ohio State hasn't been to the Big Ten championship game after winning it 4 straight years. What about the Rutgers side of this? I think it's interesting. I'm going to ask you the same question for Rutgers. You're Greg Schiano, and the game isn't going your way here against the Buckeyes. You've got yourself one game away from bowl eligibility. You need to win one of either Ohio State or Penn State. Again, we were talking about the Penn State game doesn't seem quite as formidable as it did at the beginning of the year. So how do you handle this if you're Greg and if things start to go south?
Well, basically the same way Ryan handled it. I mean, Greg Schiano is planning to beat Ohio State. I mean, that's the plan, right? And that's what he's talking about. He's talking about this huge upset in college football that also gets us bowl eligible. However, if it doesn't look like that's going to happen, I think this is one of the times when a head coach doesn't share his thoughts. It's all about he knows that Penn State is going to be next week at the birthplace, home game, and what can he do during the Ohio State game to get ready for the Penn State game? And obviously, again, these are one of the private moments that a leader and the leader in the locker room and in the program doesn't share that because that's not the right message necessarily. So coaches are put in these positions all the time, and I think that we're being taught how they deal with these things by Ryan and Greg.
It's certainly a winnable game against Penn State, and considering kind of the regional rivalry there, there's no doubt that would be a fitting way and an exciting way for Rutgers to find themselves bowl eligible. But again, first things first, this game against the Buckeyes. Minnesota basketball now 4-1 under new head coach Niko Medved after taking down Chicago State last night at the Barn. Gophers trailed in this game in the second half, but they pulled away in the final 7 minutes to get the win. As they have been in every game this year, they were led in scoring by the North Carolina transfer Cade Tyson, 22 points for him in the Minnesota victory. And their coach, Niko Medved, joining us now for our big interview. And Coach, appreciate you joining us. You've had some game pressure here these last couple of games. The Green Bay game going into overtime, as I mentioned, Chicago State was nip and tuck until you guys pulled away last night. So what have you learned about your team in these past couple of games, being able to pull out wins in games that were kind of up in the air?
I think, in the long run, hopefully these things will help us being in close games and, some adversity and having to figure out, different ways to win, different lineups, when you have so many new faces. We were a team, I thought, in the exhibition season and early on, we were in a really good rhythm. And, these last few games and maybe the last 10 minutes of the Missouri game, not quite so much. But I think you got to go through a lot of those ups and downs, with your team to try to figure it out. And the most important thing is we did find a way to win the game last night, and hopefully a much needed day off today, and just continue to improve and get better. So I really like the group. I like their approach. We've just got to continue to grow.
We saw Kay Tyson hit that big shot, and man, he has been fabulous for you guys. And to me, it's just such a cool story. I mean, here's a guy who was such a good player at Belmont. He's from North Carolina. He's Mr. Basketball in North Carolina. He goes home to play for North Carolina, and for whatever reason, it just didn't work out last year playing for the Tar Heels. And now he comes to you at Minnesota, and it just feels like he is playing. I mean, he's been your best guy from where I sit kind of all year here. What did you have to do? Like, do you have to reinstill confidence in a player like that? How have you gotten him to play at this level?
No, we really didn't have to do that. I guess showing a belief in him that he could be highly successful with us and what we do. We thought he was a great fit for our style and our system, and that was really evident. About a couple weeks into it. He works really, really hard at his game. He's obviously an exceptional shooter. I think the thing that probably people didn't understand is he's also pretty good putting the ball on the floor. He's got a quick first step. He's able to get himself to the free throw line. He moves well without the ball. He's got good length. And yeah, he's just been terrific so far. But man, he puts in the work. He's obviously playing with a lot of confidence right now. And yeah, he's kind of been our catalyst so far.
You have talked about kind of in the build-up to this season about instilling an identity in this program. How do you do that? Like, how does a coach go about saying, this is who we're going to be, and translate that to the court?
I think that's a great question. I think there's obviously some things that, it's my fourth head coaching job. There's some things that we've done every place that, I think have really translated. I mean, one of them is obviously being an unselfish team that really shares the ball well. We've been a team that's had, really high assist rate throughout the years. I think the guys have bought into that. I want to be a team that plays physical, connected on defense. I mean, the more you can build connection with each other in your program, I think that really breeds success. I think the challenge for all of us right now, you come in and you've got, one returning player. Every team kind of takes on a life of its own. And as you do this, maybe what your vision was, a month ago might be different, come the middle of January as you keep growing. And like that happened to our team last year at Colorado State. And so I think it's instilling those core things you believe in, but also be willing to grow together. You've got new faces, new roles. So that thing continues to be a work in progress. I think that's what it is for us this year. But as long as they stay with it and stay together, they're going to continue to get better.
It's pretty interesting, your story. Obviously, you're from the state of Minnesota. You grew up going to Gopher games. You were a student manager when you were there. I'm just interested. I know it's still really early, but what's this been like to be sitting in that chair that was Coach Haskins' office when you were there, and now you're sitting there? Has it been surreal? What's kind of been the moment here?
And, Dave, there's moments where it's surreal, where you kind of have maybe a flashback or something like, wow, this is cool. If somebody had asked me, 15, 20 years ago, if I could have one job in my life, what would it be? It'd be the one that I currently have, So that's pretty cool stuff. But I'll tell you what, you just get into your mode of coaching and working and trying to build, and you don't really take a lot of time to think about that because there's so much going on. You're just focused on your team. You're focused on, building support in your program. You're focused on recruiting, all those things. So you really don't take a lot of time to soak it all in. But yes, there have been moments where you feel that way. It's really cool to look down in the stands and see my mom and dad, have the opportunity to be at every game. And, my brothers, sisters-in-law, nieces, nephews, and friends. There's been people I haven't seen in, 20 years that, have come up to me at the games before or after. And that part's been really cool. And so I take a lot of pride in that. And I know I'm really blessed, to have this opportunity that we have.
Yeah, it's a super cool story. And I know you always want to be a coach, but I read where you felt like it was probably maybe the high school level where you would be a coach, maybe go back to your high school, like coach in Minnesota, but coach at Roseville High rather than at the University of Minnesota. What is it about coaching that speaks to you? Why do you think this is the right calling for you?
You know, I can't, that's a great, I can't put my finger on it. You know, my mom and dad would tell you that for whatever reason, you know, teaching, coaching, mentoring, it's always been something that's in my blood. I've always wanted to do it. I've always known that. I think even when I was in high school. So for me, I just wanted that opportunity to coach. And, you know, I had somebody tell me before, you know, sometimes your life is bigger than your dreams. And you never, you know, you think about, man, I want to be a head coach at some point, and it's not even, it's just too wild for you when you're, you know, 22 years old to think that you could be a Big Ten head coach. But I think when you really do what you love and you're passionate about it and you put in time, and it's amazing what opportunities keep coming. And then, you know, you want to start to be involved at the highest level you can. You get an itch for it. I'm also a really competitive person. And so it's just been really cool how this whole thing has transpired. But I think, you know, when you're doing what you love and what you're passionate about, and in my case, I think it's what I was meant to do. There were so many ups and downs along the ways, but, you know, you take those ups and downs and help you learn and grow and get better. And yeah, here I am today. But I think it started out with, I just wanted to be a coach. And because of that, you know, I stuck with it, and here I am today.
How different is it in this new environment with portal and NIL? Well, how do you have to kind of adapt your style and the way that you approach it?
I mean, of course, there's changes, but there's always been change. There's never been this much change in a short period of time. And I think the whole key is you have to evolve. Everybody's got to continue to evolve with the times, but how do you evolve without fundamentally changing who you are, what you believe in, types of players you have in your program, the things that you expect on a daily basis? I don't change any of that. I don't change how I coach the guys or my approach or anything like that. You've just got to evolve, and in recruiting, how you build your team, how you build support, you know, all those things continually change around us. I mean, the rules may change again in December, who knows, but you've got to roll with the punches there and continue to evolve. But I still think you can do that without fundamentally changing who you are, you know, the core things that you stand for. And I think that's what the most successful people do. So can't be afraid of the changes. They're coming. They're going to continue to change. I can promise you that. So you just got to evolve and roll with it. Our job is different in so many ways than it was 5 to 7 years ago, but still in a lot of ways it's the same. We still get to go to practice every day. We still have to work on building a team, building culture, recruiting guys that fit, building support in your program. You had to do those things when I first started as a head coach too. So I find myself doing a lot of the same things that we've always done.
Well, the next thing you got to do is prepare for a game against the University of San Francisco. This game's at the Sanford Pentagon in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is right over the border from the state of Minnesota. How important is it for you to have a game like this that people in a different region of the state who might not be able to get up to the Twin Cities on a consistent basis to support the Gophers, how important is it to have a game there and to maybe allow some people who wouldn't otherwise get to see Minnesota play to get to see it?
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to do that. It's interesting. I've never been to the Sanford Pentagon. I've heard it's an unbelievable facility. So many people have played there for whatever reason. I've never had the chance, so I'm looking forward to it. I think they're great partners for us, just for the reasons you said. You know, we've got a great fan base up in that area, and it's maybe something that we'll look at doing on a regular basis. And you know, San Francisco's they got a great program. You know, I'm obviously really familiar with them being out west. You know, started with Kyle Smith and Todd Golden, and they just do a great job. And so our fans may not know a ton about San Francisco, but this is going to be a really good game for us, and we're looking forward to it.
We are looking forward to it as well. Really a pleasure to get to visit with you here, Niko. Congratulations on a nice start here for the Gophers, and we'll look forward to connecting as the season continues.
Hey, thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Saturday, a football triple-header kicks off with Minnesota against Northwestern at Wrigley Field. Then Michigan looks to keep its playoff hopes alive against Maryland. It's followed by Illinois battling Wisconsin under the lights at Camp Randall. All starts with countdown to kickoff, 11:30 Eastern, 8:30 Pacific on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. And that first game is a huge one for the Cats. They've been stuck on 5 wins for a while here, 3 straight losses and potential bowl clinchers. Rutgers, as we discussed, is also 1 win away. Maryland and Penn State have to win out. 10 Big Ten teams have already secured spots in the postseason. So, Jerry, let's get into the Gophers and the Cats. I think these teams have a lot in common. Probably starts with struggling offenses. What do you think ultimately separates these two?
Well, it was interesting when Minnesota was playing Oregon. They almost looked like Andy Kotelnicki's offense at Penn State. They were kind of wide open, unusual formations, and it really looked like something that PJ hadn't done a lot of. PJ is I think he's a 50-50 guy, run pass. He could win with the run, win with the pass, but be more physical. So I'm anxious to see how he comes and addresses the Northwestern game. First of all, they haven't won a road game yet. They've lost every road game. But I think he'll get back to his roots, which, again, I think is a balanced offense. But he'd love to be able to run the ball. I think Northwestern right now, although they've struggled, as you just described, in wins and losses, I think they're really playing better football than Minnesota. I find it interesting that I think that quarterback play is going to make the difference, but it's only going to make the difference if the defenses are playing well and the run game on offense as well. And the reason I say that is I think both quarterbacks, like all quarterbacks, would benefit from good field position. I don't like either one of these quarterbacks having to drive 80 yards for a score. So I think if whoever plays better defense helps their quarterback. Obviously, whoever runs the ball better helps their quarterback. So the quarterback that plays better will be supported by their defense and their run game. And then the only other thing, Rever, it's senior day, and that can be emotional. You know, Minnesota's got this not winning a road game. That can be emotional. That can be a motivator. Let's make sure we get a road win. And then you have the Northwestern team, even though it's in Wrigley, it's their last home game. And I'm guessing for some people, especially the seniors, that's emotional.
Hey, talk about field position. I mean, Northwestern had unbelievable field position against Michigan thanks to those 5 turnovers. Just couldn't take advantage of it. They continue to struggle mightily in the red zone. They're under 47% red zone touchdown percentage, among the 15 worst in the country this year. So Northwestern needs 1 win for a bowl. Penn State needs 2. They're taking on Nebraska. I think, we were talking about some similarities, like in that Michigan-Maryland game. You have the 2 freshman quarterbacks. Here you have 2 guys who did not expect to be the starting quarterback at the beginning of the year, but are now kind of thrust into these spots. Ethan Grunkemeyer, TJ Lateef. What do you think when you stack those 2 guys up against one another?
Yeah, I think this story is compelling. I think there's a lot of depth to this, right? I think both teams haven't missed their starters. And if we start with Penn State, Drew Aller, Grunkemeyer can do whatever Drew Aller was doing for Penn State. I don't see a significant difference. On Nebraska sides, TJ Lateef, that Nebraska offense is so much more difficult than to defend with Lateef in there than it was with Raiola. And I also think there could be a morale issue. When you put your quarterbacks up on a pedestal, which both these programs did, and they're not playing great. I don't think Drew was playing great. I don't think Dylan Raiola was playing great. You wonder how it impacts the morale of the team. And now you have these 2 quarterbacks, especially Nebraska. I mean, TJ Lateef is for real. He is a dual threat quarterback. He can make all the throws. Your offensive line now isn't protecting a pocket pass. And one of the most difficult thing for an offensive line to do is to block pass protection. And with Raiola, when Raiola was the quarterback, we know how many sacks they were getting. Well, that was part of the system, and it wasn't just the offensive line not doing a good enough job. You've eliminated the sack problem at Nebraska. Now at Nebraska, you have to defend the quarterback run and the tailback run, and they have a great tailback running game. So I find it interesting. I don't think either one of these programs have missed their quarterbacks one bit, and I would say it's made Nebraska a better offense and a better team.
Well, with both these teams, as you say, you've got to defend the run game. And Penn State early on this year was struggling to run it, but it feels like they've gotten it going here. They had 240 rushing yards against Michigan State, which was a season high. And, man, Emmett Johnson, it should not get lost what a great season Emmett Johnson is having. Not just running the ball, Jerry, and he's a 1,000-yard back, but, man, he's so dangerous out of the backfield as well. He is just absolutely fabulous. It's a huge challenge, no doubt, for that Penn State defense.
Yeah, and Emmett is more of a challenge now than he ever was, right? Because now when that ball is when the quarterback takes the ball and starts to ride the tailback, and you've got to defend Latif and Emmett Johnson. I mean, there's no more stress in the run game than the decide option with Latif and with Johnson. And Johnson was gaining all these yards not in an option attack. And I'm not saying they're going to become a wishbone team, but they are going to change dramatically with a quarterback that can run and not a quarterback that is always in the pocket, 5 to 7 yards deep, and you have 3.1 seconds to throw the ball or you're sacked. The difference is night and day with their offense, for the better.
Nebraska looks to win consecutive road games for the first time since 2020. Obviously, you have the Matt Rule going back to Penn State. That's an interesting sidebar as well. So a lot to digest in that one.